the Sadducees, thinking that they are smarter, quicker, better educated than everyone else, we find them quarreling with Jesus, asking him this hypothetical question, and all they're doing is trying to trip him up. They didn't, of course. If you set out to trip up Jesus, you're just going to go away empty and disappointed. But in this conversation, we're offered a few important points and ideas about the resurrection himself directly from Jesus. For you see, in the discussion, we learn more than if we were just given answers. Or I believe that. We don't get a full picture of what happens when we die in this conversation, and it's not even the beginning of a close answer of what we get. But what we do get from Jesus is so well worth paying attention to. So if we simply pay close attention to what Jesus is saying in this reading, what do we learn about life after death? I can see three important insights from Jesus in his argument, this current argument with the Sadducees, about what life will look like after the resurrection. First, listen to what Jesus said to the Sadducees about who will be joining us in the resurrection. He says, and I quote, "Those who are considered worthy of a place in that age and in the resurrection from the dead." Resurrection from the dead, in other words, is not a human right. We can't assume that we're all going to enjoy life after death. It's not a given. It's a gift from God. It's an act that God does out of love for us. Only those who are considered worthy will receive the gift, and though Jesus doesn't say it here, this means that our resurrection is a gift directly from Jesus to us. Without his death for us, there is no resurrection. There is no hope for resurrection. There's nothing that you can do to guarantee that. There's nothing I can do to guarantee mine, nor can we do it for each other. None of us, after all, as St. Paul would say, are worthy of a place in that age. For all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. All have feet of clay. There's no distinction, as Paul teaches us, for we know that we've all fallen short of what God expects of us. Sadducees and Pharisees and tax collectors and disciples of Jesus, as you and I know, are all in the same big boat. The boat that perishes when Jesus isn't at the stern. We'll perish without him. And so we should always be grateful for this gift of God to us and humbled by it. We can look forward to the resurrection thanks to Jesus. Thanks only to Jesus and only because of him. I think that any discussion of eternal life that we have needs to start and end right there. We will all have resurrection. We will all have life after death. And all we have to do to obtain it is to wholeheartedly love God and love Jesus. But what then? What other clues do we get from today's reading? Neither marry nor are given in marriage is the example that Jesus gives. Jesus is speaking to the Sadducees who've asked him a tricky hypothetical question about what happens when someone has multiple marriages in this lifetime. Who will they be in the next? Who's married to who? Can you imagine if you had 7 brothers, and when the last one passes away and the bride passes away, 7 brothers sitting there waiting saying, "I married her." "Well, but I married her too." "No, I married her." "No, but I married her." And all of these brothers were doing what they were taught in the Old Testament you had to do. It was incumbent as a duty upon each of us to marry our brother's widow and to take care of her. Because that was one of the things in that mindset of the day, there's nothing that was worse, and that was being widowed. Remember, there was no Social Security. There was no welfare. There was no food stamps. If you didn't have someone who could help win bread and put food on the table, you died. I think sometimes we haven't come that far. Because what are we doing here today? They asked the question not because they wanted to know the answer and they didn't care, but because they wanted to trip up Jesus. They wanted to show how smart they were. But we all know that it's impossible to trip up Jesus. Here is his answer to them. Those in the resurrection from the dead, neither may they marry nor are they given in marriage. What does that mean? Does that mean that if you're married now and then you pass away, that when you go to the church triumphant, you're not married anymore? Well, first, remember how unique our current culture's view of marriage is. We have a very romantic view of marriage. We believe that marriage is all about love. Well, at the time of the New Testament, marriage was actually something quite different, I would contend. It was more about passing down family land, family name, than it was about romance or love. And as we can see in this reading, it was not a very good nor always a beneficial deal for women. To our newlyweds, I hate to tell you that, but aren't you glad it's not 2,000 years ago? The Sadducees see no problem in this passage of using as an example a woman who has to marry 7 different brothers simply to provide this family with a male heir who can keep the family land. The Sadducees are quite obviously all men. To the woman in their hypothetical story, I'm pretty sure that an afterlife without marriage would sound like, well, heavenly. It truly was a good thing. But the basic point I think that Jesus is making is that life after death is not going to be like life is now, what we know of. It'll be different in ways that you and I can't even imagine or begin to understand. We often imagine heaven as being like earth without all the suffering. But Jesus reminds us that what God has in store for us is going to be unlike anything we've ever experienced or even conceptualized. And so Jesus invites us simply to believe in him and to trust him. It's going to be great because it'll be why? With Jesus. You know, that's all we need to trust in and know. We don't need to know more about life after death if we just trust him. We don't need to trust, and if we don't trust Jesus, then no amount of information can be enough. I think the third point is that he makes is they can't die anymore. Suffering will be over, pain will be over, death will be over. But moving on, we learn that we will never die again if we truly believe in Jesus. Jesus puts it this way: those who are raised from the dead cannot die anymore because they are like angels and are the children of God, being children of the resurrection. What a promise I think that is. After we die and are raised from the dead, we cannot die anymore. We'll be like eternal angels, children of the resurrection. We'll be changed in ways beyond those that we can imagine. But we will not die. And this promise gives us courage to live life boldly, live life unlimitedly. That's perhaps one reason why the Sadducees didn't really care about Jesus too much, or anyone who was going around teaching about the resurrection. Because it takes away, for some, the power that they thought they had. In fact, the resurrection is a problem to anyone who's trying to control us, because it takes one of their greatest weapons, our fear of death, and it throws it away. It's very hard to threaten someone who's unafraid of death. So the promise of the resurrection that Jesus clearly makes here may not be for everyone good news. But as believers of Christ and his glory and power, it has a powerful lesson to teach us. I like listening to my Sirius radio, and there's a song that I was listening to this past week, and it's Death, I Have No Use for You. It talks about how Jesus removed the stone and set us free. And my favorite line in it is, Death, you're dead to me. What a beautiful concept to be able to, for a song, to stare in the face of death and say, you are dead to me. Go on, you're just a bothersome little mosquito that wants to make me afraid. You know, think about Job. Job was a righteous man of God. God allowed Satan to destroy Job's wealth, his property, kill his children, and afflict Job himself with boils all over his body to prove that Satan was truly in control. Or so Satan thought he was. Are you still holding on to your integrity? Curse God and die, Satan tells Job. That's it. Just curse God one time, and then you get to win. His closest friends, Eliphaz, Bildad, Zophar, were no more helpful than his wife was. They heard about Job's troubles. They came for a visit to sympathize with him and comfort him, and they did a pretty good job at first. But when they arrived at Job's place, they wept aloud, they tore their robes, and they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and 7 nights without saying a word. Real comforting, right? You're not afraid of death, right? But then they lost their patience and they started trying to explain what Job's misfortunes were. They need to understand what happened, not for Job's sake, but for their own sake, so that they could better understand. Why else would God let Job suffer? Why else would God have exams determine an entire semester's grades? Why else would God make us study something called contract law? Well, they didn't know the answers any more than we do too today. But what was Job's response to these challenges to his faith? He didn't try to explain what happened to him, nor did he try to defend God. He was in truth angry with God. He refused to back down from what he knew was true, that he didn't deserve these horrible ordeals, but that he did not mean that God didn't exist or was punishing him for his sins. You know, today's reading, I think, highlights one overall main point. And it's a question that we should ask ourselves, and here is your homework. Are you alive or dead? Even though you may be dead, if you've put your trust in your faith in the risen Jesus the Christ, if you've loved God radically as Jesus loved us. And remember, God never asked us to do anything that he doesn't show us how to do first. If you do those things, you truly are alive and you can never, ever die. Truly die. Because God will be there with you and I, because Christ is there with you and I. So in closing, today's readings, I don't think, answer all of our questions about life after death, not even begin to be close. But today's readings do make us a promise. And I guess to compartmentalize it, that's when we die, we get to see God. We get to be with Jesus, and that we'll never have to die again. And whatever else comes, that's really all you and I really need to know. May we know this in our minds, our hearts, our bodies, our souls, and our very being. And may our lives be shaped by this good news, the good news of the gospel of Jesus Christ. Because whenever we are disciples of Jesus the Christ, we go forward with God's blessing. And we go forward in God's name. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit.